What's going on, everybody? Boris here at the Ecology Design Studio, and today we're talking about CSS, and that's right, cascading style sheets. A lot of S's. I'm hoping they're not coming in too bad on the microphone I got here. In the previous videos that we went over in the previous tutorial series, we covered environmental configuration. We covered how to get different software components so we can set up an environment where we can build web applications and different software components. Now that we have some of those videos out there and we know what's out there and how to configure it, how to make it work for us, we can start writing some code. We're going to focus pretty heavily on UI and UX development in the beginning, user interface and user experience. We'll talk more about what those two are down the road in different videos. For now, I want to jump straight in and show you some basic fundamental things we can do for users on our website in different browsers. I have Internet Explorer and I have Chrome here, and you'll notice some interesting things. For example, my scroll bar is looking very different than what the default browser scroller looks like, and there's a reason for that. When the user goes to a website, you want to create a good impression, you want to capture their attention, and since we're working in a web application, there's not all that much that we can do. So that comes to the usability of our site, the experience the user is going to receive, and if the site loads quickly and looks nice, then we have a much better chance of capturing that viewer, that user of the website for returning visits. And one simple thing we can do is to add a custom scroll bar in addition to a custom JQuery drag directive for resizing. And we can do this with AngularJS, with jQuery, with different JavaScript options, right? So we have JavaScript is what we use to manipulate the DOM on the browser. And then we have different levels of abstraction. We have different libraries for that. We have jQuery. And then on top of that, we have AngularJS, which has controllers and directives. And in the directives, we can use some jQuery plugins to add functionality to our site. And what I've done here is basically changed the scroll bar in Internet Explorer, and as you can see, it does something a little different. If we go to MSN, we'll see this is the default IE scroll bar, and actually I like this one better than what I did. I'm showing you this because I've shaved off a couple of pixels, made it a little thinner, right? If you're trying to fit in more content on the page, and this is just for demonstration purposes on how you can change in Internet Explorer. If you're working on something like Chrome, right, you can do something much nicer. There's a blue version of this. I'll show you where to get it. And I overrode the images on these using Photoshop and Fireworks. There'll be tutorials on how to do this and how to create UI components from scratch down the road. For now, suffice it to say that I took an existing CSS component and made some of my own changes to it to style it in the way that I want. And there's still a lot of work to be done here. I think I want to make it a little thinner, a little snazzier, right? This is different. I haven't seen this anywhere else. If you hover over the arrow, then the red highlight, if you can see this, I don't know if I can zoom in, if it's going to make, yeah, it's going to make the scroll bar bigger. There you go. Look at that. Look at that. That is beautiful right there. So when we hover over it, that's when we see the arrow. When you click on it, it changes color. When you hover over it, it changes color. When you click on it, it's different, right? So those are all variables and scenarios that we have to keep track of in our mind as we're creating this. These are things we have to worry about, right? What is the track for the bar going to look like? What is the color of the scroll bar going to look like when the user hovers over it? What about when they click the arrows? And what about, you know, when they drag the animations and everything? Same thing with this here, right? We want to make sure that if they drag up, it's going to do it correctly. As you can see, when you zoom in, there's some inconsistencies. Let's go back to 100% and refresh. All right, so I haven't nailed this down 100% perfectly because it mostly depends on the parent and child elements that you have around these things here. So without any further ado, let me show you some stuff on Stack Overflow when they're talking about CSS customized scroll bars. And currently there exists no cross-browser scroll bar CSS styling definitions. This is true. You have to do different things across different browsers and it can get kind of hectic. But as long as we're keeping track of what we're doing where, we can do a decent job of consistently updating the scroll bar across multiple browsers. And here it's going to show you different options on Chrome and Safari using WebKit. That's what we're doing here. And down here, different styles, different styling. One thing that I like, and this is where the majority of the code comes from, right? I'm not at the level where I can just knock out a scroll bar with my eyes closed. I have to learn it somewhere, and I learned it from here. This is webkit.org, and they have open source components that you can use, a lot of good information. This is what the blue scroll bar looks like, and let me zoom in here so you guys can see it a little better right there. So this is what theirs looks like, right? And this is for the expanding the page, right? They've thought of that as well. And the blue and the gray, I think it looks really nice, very subdued, not intrusive at all. This red pops out, and that's what I wanted. I wanted something eye-catching, something sleek. So I made these transparent, and only on hover do they become red, right? So that was a conscious decision to change that design here, for better or for worse, right? But the point here is to show you how you can change it for your projects in any way that you want to. So let me minimize these, and let's take a look at the code. First things first, I'm using Adobe Dreamweaver for this. I tried using IntelliJ. I'm working on a Java project with JSP, Java Server Pages, and I'm having some issues including things such as my style sheet and context definitions, because I'm trying to use RESTful calls and all that. I haven't quite figured that out yet. It's very new to me, so as soon as I do, we'll switch over back to IntelliJ. But for UI design, I like Dreamweaver a lot because it just lets you do whatever it is you're doing, right? When we're doing UI design, we're not dependent on anything on the back end. We don't care about that. We want to make it dynamic. We want to make it responsive so that it can fit any type of data and that won't affect the page. So we want to make sure we get the UI design down right, and then we can just plug in whatever it is we're needing from the back end. Here I'm using Dreamweaver, and if you've used Dreamweaver, you might be looking at this going, that doesn't look like Dreamweaver at all, because it is actually nice and dark and doesn't burn your eyes out with bright white light. The way I changed this, I went to File, or not File, Edit, Preferences, Default Background. Change it to this. I'll provide all this down in the description. Hashtag 2B2E46, right? That's the color hex. We don't want black because that's going to contrast a little too much with everything else. And we want subdued gray. And you'll notice that the colors that will pop up here are not good looking. So we want to change those as well. A little bit of work on the front end, but I think it's worth it for better usability and a better experience. We want to navigate to users, your name, app data, roaming, Adobe, Dreamweaver, English, configuration, and then finally code coloring. You're going to see a colors.xml file. Rename it to colors_original. Let me click on this and bring it into view. Basically, this defines all of the colors. Some very simple custom tags, XML tags, that tells Dreamweaver what colors to use where and when, right? For SVG tags, action scripts, CSS imports, properties, HTML, tables, and all that. They all have a different color. And this is basically UI design that you're looking at, right? Somebody decided that these colors go well together or present a good user experience, and then they plugged it in here. What we want to do is overwrite those, and I'll show you the website I went to get this document. These are basically nighttime colors that make it fit with this background that I have here. And then we can have a night version of Dreamweaver so that it's not very bright all the time. And that saves us some headache. Alright, so let's jump in here. We're going to need some things first. Let's create a project. So you're going to need file, new, and then HTML. Just HTML is fine, or blank template. Doesn't really matter. Just create something. And then structure your project something along these lines. Resources, right? We have our site, then we have the resources, CSS, images. Let me collapse these out. These are the folders that we're going to need. And then underneath here, we're going to create a custom app.js. You can call it whatever you want. This is our JavaScript for this application, for this page, the JavaScript that we're using. We then want to include JQuery, JQuery UI. You can get the minified version. and that's the CSS, the jQuery UI JavaScript, and jQuery UI structure. I don't know if I'm really using this, but I just threw it in there. We can include Angular at some point, and then we have an HTML document. And in our HTML document, we have our namespace definitions, our declarations, right? Doc type HTML. We're doing XHTML 1.0 transitional. I know HTML5 is the buzzword around, but if you deal with legacy applications, or if you're dealing with Internet Explorer 8 or 9 support, HTML5 is not really your best friend. So we want to make sure that when we create something, we're also keeping in mind the user base that is still not caught up to HTML5 or to modern browsers, or enterprises that can't because the browsers change too much, there's too many updates, so they're still relying on some of the more stable browsers out there, but that means giving up some functionality. Again, just entirely your choice for design. Moving on here, we have the meta. We can include more stuff for the meta, but we do content type, text, HTML, define our char set, UTF-8, universal time font. And then script types, we want to include all the JavaScript that we just put in here in our project so the page knows where to find them. Usually there is a rule, CSS up top, scripts on the bottom, right? Theory behind it is the user is not going to stick around on your page if it doesn't load. And if you have a lot of JavaScript that needs to load, nothing is really going to show to the user until those scripts are loaded. And if you're trying to load jQuery and custom JavaScript and AngularJS, right? If you're trying to load a bunch of stuff, it's going to take a while for that page to pop up, especially if you're doing if you're executing queries and things from the very beginning on page load. So to create a good user experience, we throw the page up immediately, so the person at least sees the HTML and they know that there's a page there and it's responding. If they're staring at a white screen a second or two and they're gone, or a lot of people are gone. And if the page pops up, right, there's a much larger chance, much greater chance that they're going to stick around. Here we don't really care, this is just a test, but I'm giving you some idea of the best practices that I've encountered previously. And then of course we include the style sheets, jQuery UI, and then resources, style.css. This is my global style sheet. I call it style.css. You can call it styles or whatever you like. Title doesn't really matter. Body, we're creating a body here with two divs, one and then two, and then a divider, a div for a divider in the middle here. And you can copy this. Again, I'll post it on our website, ecologydesigns.com, along with all the code. It will be accessible for you guys to play around with. Here we're creating two divs, and we want to make sure that the height of those divs are smaller than the inner divs, right? We're creating div 1, and then within that division we're creating another one that is much harder, because we're trying to force an overflow. We're not really trying to design anything here, we're just trying to demonstrate the scroll bar and the draggable divider. Then down here on the bottom, the exact same thing. We create our div, and then within that another one with a larger height. And now let's take a look at the CSS, style.css. It's quite a bit of code. You're gonna take a look at it, right? And then basically you can use this same one and then just put in your images. You can replace the URL with whatever you're using. And you can check out the other tutorials that are coming up where we create custom UI components from scratch, and I show you how to use Fireworks and Photoshop to create those and style them. You can do some really cool stuff if you're trying to do a scroll bar for a video game menu, for example. You don't want to have anything that remotely looks like a browser. That's a no-no. You want to create something cool, stylish, right? If you're working for an RPG or something like that, maybe gears that are rotating, or maybe fire or something. Doesn't really matter. The idea is that it needs to be unique. For a browser, we can get away with just styling the color and the shape and the response on hover and click. But we can also do some cool stuff and replace the images with something unique as well, like dragon teeth, or I don't know. So let's go through this here. The CSS for Internet Explorer is pretty easy. We have a scroll bar, base color, scroll bar, 3D color, highlight, track, arrow, shadow, and dark shadow. Let me show you an image of what that looks like. All right, this website offers some good insight, Code Mug, on what we're looking at. Let me go back to, let me close this. Okay, so this is the CSS we're seeing. Let me come here. We have custom scroll bars for IE, Chrome, and Firefox, and we can use this. This is what I'm using. Change the colors around a little bit to make it somewhat different. The reason why my highlight colors and everything, they're a little different. That's why we're not seeing a lot of on-click stuff. The 3D light color is this bevel, the effect that makes it looking like a bevel here around the corners. The scroll bar arrow is obviously this thing. Scroll bar dark shadow color here on the right to create a texture effect, not a texture effect, but a lighting effect, right? The light is coming from the left going on towards the right. You can change the perspective and composition of this piece, if you will, and it feels odd talking about perspective and composition when talking about a scroll bar, but this really is basically an image or an agglomeration of images, image components that are put together to create what we think of as a scroll bar. And nowadays people don't really think about that, right? A scroll bar is just a scroll bar. It's not something we worry about or think about. But when you're getting down in the weeds of it, we need to understand how a browser renders pixels, how the operating system renders certain things, right? And we're actually going to get into that when we're talking about the select drop downs and why we can't do certain things because of limitations and how the operating system renders them in the browsers and so on and so forth. Moving on here is scroll bar face color, right? This main gray color that we see here. The scroll bar track color, what the track that this piece lies on, and we scroll over. So basically that's it in a nutshell. For Internet Explorer, going down to Chrome gets a little more interesting. We're using WebKit, and then we have to define a lot of different properties. Let's walk through them briefly and see what they do. In the interest of time, I don't want to take up a lot of your time on this tutorial. Let's jump right into the code here. We've already covered IE. We're setting the width and the height here with WebKit scroll bar. When we're making any changes to a WebKit browser like Chrome, we do namespace definition dash WebKit dash scroll bar dash whatever else we're trying to do. If you want to make it a little thinner, I'll do 10 pixels, and I need to do a global replace on this, so 13 replaced to 10 because it's being set in a lot of pieces. If you just replace the scroll bar, it's going to mess it up because all the images have a width property as well. Replace all. We need to save. Okay, as you can see, it became a little thinner, and now the arrow is misaligned. That is because we're 2 pixels off, right? If the width is 13, then 6 and 6 and 7 is the middle pixel. Now it's 10, that's 5 and 5, and there's really no way you can center it. So you have to pick an odd number, like 11, and then the 6th pixel is the one you center it on. So let's revert here. Save, refresh, became a little thicker. And now we're scrolling down, WebKit resizer, window inactive, scroll track disabled, all of these things. I'm not going to go through all of them. You can take a look at the code and the description below. The point of this is mostly to make you aware of WebKit border image, of these classes, and how you can use them to manipulate the browser. And then you'll see all of the images being placed in their specific place, right? So here I'm specifying the URL, resources, img, scroll bar. And to change it to the blue one, all I'll do is replace scroll bar with scroll bar underscore blue. On hover, as you can see, it changes. And the way it changes, it just replaces the resource that it's using. So instead of using the active PNG, it's using the on hover PNG. When I click on it, it's displaying something completely different. It's displaying the on click, or this is the active, this is the normal. Then when you click on it, it becomes active, and it does the bright red. Kind of matches with the track a little more. I think I can create better contrast, make this a little lighter, maybe dull red. For these, the buttons, right, it's transparent, then it's red, and then you click on it, it becomes a little darker red. I don't know if you can see that. It becomes a little darker red to indicate that you click on it, to let the user know. The coloring still needs a little bit of work. Maybe this color needs to be the track, and then keep this as bright red. Again, all this is available on arcologydesigns.com. Check out the description of this video for links to this code, to this package, with the images included, of course. And then you can take the images, repaint them in a color of your liking. Now it's become disabled, and you can see it's this grayish color, right? Because this is disabled now. I'm not entirely sure how to get it to become disabled. It just sometimes it does. But this is the disabled status, and then when we hover over it, now it changes. And then click on it, right? So we're seeing all 3 states: disabled, regular, on hover, and click. 4 states. WebKit scroll bar track vertical disabled. So when the status is disabled, this vertical track here that is now bright red changes to this image, whatever this image is, vertical track disabled.png. And you can see that we're setting some properties here. We're using URL and then 13 and 13. So this is a shorthand for how you specify the position of an image. We're doing WebKit border image, and we're specifying it. I think it's top right, bottom left. That's the shorthand. So this is 13 pixels from the top, 0 from the right, top right, bottom, and then left. Moving down here, let's scroll all the way down. Single WebKit, scroll bar button, start, decrement, increment, and then we're making sure that we're displaying it as a block element. And then here we're setting a lot of these to either none or block, and you can check out what they do. Scroll bar button start, and then on and on. I'm not entirely 100% sure what all of these classes do myself. I do understand some of them, that especially these where you're replacing the image when you're specifying the position. But I'm not fully 100% on how WebKit browsers and the operating system they rely on display and render certain things. That is going to be an investigation in a different video. For now that we've seen the CSS on this and we know that the links are down in the description, let's move on to, let me collapse this and take a look at app.js. This is what makes it tick, right? I wrote this in Angular in the beginning as an Angular directive, which is pretty easy. It's basically the same code. You're just adding, dot directive here. But this project doesn't have Angular included in it, so we're using just pure JQuery, and it relies on JQuery, JQuery UI. And if we come back here, the UI is supposed to be purple as well, meaning it's not being found. So this is not exactly working as we wanted to. There's still some changes to be made, but as you can see, when I click on it and drag on it, it works just fine. It just needs to be tweaked for your specific project, for your specific browser. And to explain what we're doing here, we're using the draggable component, the draggable class of jQuery UI. So draggable divider, we're using draggable. This is a jQuery UI piece right here. This is our class. So we're telling the browser, when you find this class called draggable divider, and let's go to main HTML, we have a div with a class draggable divider. So when this class is found, apply the draggable jQuery UI logic to it on the y-axis, on the vertical axis when we're going back and forth. If we wanted to do horizontal, we would put this, for example, would make it taller, would make it about 100, 200 pixels tall, and we'd put these divs on either side of it, right? This would be float left or something, and then we can drag left and right. So this is going to be the x-axis. So we can change it, and I can put something together for that as well. But for now, we're just concerned about the y-axis. And then containment, child, we're using the child elements of the previous. This will become a little more clear in the beginning. If I do parent, let's do parent. Let's save this. All right. And see how it stops right there. It comes to the end of the parent, stops, and you have to click on it again, and then now it doesn't really, it just stops. If we do child, and then sometimes it'll get hung up, you'll have some stickiness to it. Let's refresh that. Now we can drag all the way down, all the way up, right? It's much more fluid. But the preference is up to you if you want it to be on dragging down a little less responsive or restricted. You can use the parent element. Helper, clone. If we had some sort of a different background color, you would see that there's a little circle thing right here that looks like a minified version of this scroll bar. All right, you even see the corners being rounded and everything in the right places. And when you're dragging up, it's either right to the side of you or right above you, but it's the cloned object for it's a helper. It'll let you know where it is and all that. And you can change the CSS for it, and look at that in a different video, so that it's not as visible. Because sometimes, say for example, we had a blue background or a gray background, when you go up, it would become visible. We can do away with that easily by having no helper at all. Moving on to the drag, we're doing a function, and we're using an event and the UI as parameters to the function. Var height equals UI.offset.top, and let's look this up in Google. I think it's thinking that this is a web page. It is not. Let's go google.com. Okay. And jQuery API documentation. Strongly recommend you guys take a look at that if you're interested. This is the offset method. And then when we scroll down, we can do offset coordinates, offset function, offset dot something like we did, offset dot top. The best way to find an offset. It gives you some examples. What we're doing here is going from the top. So every time we scroll, we're calculating how much we're scrolling and taking it off, adding it down here, right? I'm subtracting 5 pixels and then dividing by 2. And all this craziness you won't have to do when you're creating a valid page with valid divs. So say for example you had a menu bar here. You have to calculate the height of this thing. Then you had some kind of a table here. Then you had the scroll bar. And then you had maybe an image display here, or maybe something else. Then you could calculate. You have to get the height of all these things here, in addition to the offset, and then pass in that height for this div and then this div. Let's keep going here. All that will make sense in a little bit. Then we're calculating the window height. Win height equals, this is just the jQuery thing, $window.height. And then for var div1, we're looking for this tag. So we're creating the variable called div1, which is basically this component, the height of div1. So let's come here, ID div1. So we're getting the height of this, which is 220 pixels. Then var bottom height, which is the Windows height minus this height of the offset minus div1 minus Windows height again divided by 2 and then plus 150. And I'm doing this because if I don't, then let me show you what happens if I don't do that. Okay, I do have a semicolon. So let me delete this. Control exit real quick and then save. Okay, so you can see some changes being made already. Now if I click on it, it disappears. I have to drag and it's gone because we're subtracting too much height. If I just do minus Windows height, then we're subtracting the Windows height again here from the bottom, and then it just disappears because we can't see it since we've taken off too much. If I get rid of this, let's refresh. Now we're adding too much. Before we were subtracting too much. Now we're not subtracting enough. It doesn't know what to do. So when as soon as we click on it, it's doing these calculations and it's adding, and oh, bam, look at that. And now you can't really do anything with it. The trick is, let's Control Z our way out of this mess and save. The trick is, if you're going to do this, you have to get the right height amounts, and it's certainly possible. You don't have to do any tricks like this, divided by 2. This is just for expediency's sake, since I only have 2 divs, and then I've set my body height, do something different. So make sure you calculate all these properly. Anything that is above the draggable divider, you need to account for, and anything that is below. And then when we do, I'm passing in height here, UI offset dot top -5. Usually you won't have to do much except UI dot offset dot top, and then minus the menu bar, and then minus whatever else is here. Since I don't have anything here, I'm just doing minus dot top, because whenever we drag up, it calculates this, subtracts it, calculates, subtracts it, and as you can see, it's smooth. It's perfectly dynamic, because every time I move 1 pixel, it subtracts 1 pixel. We need to do the same thing for the bottom, so that every time I move my mouse, it subtracts just the right amount. And we can try doing something like UI.offset.bottom, or we can do bottom height is the height of the window minus the height for the top, and then minus whatever is in here, so that we can get just the amount we move by. And then of course we're doing $ this dot previous dot height, and we're passing in this height as the height. I'm doing dot previous because I just want to capture the previous element before the draggable divider. So if we come here in main HTML, if I do dot previous, then I'm doing this div right here. If I do next, then I'm doing this div right here. I can specify them by name, and in reality that might be preferable. Here I want to demonstrate how we can use these methods to tell the browser what we're trying to accomplish. So if I do dot previous dot height, pass in this height, then I'm manipulating the height of this div based on the calculations we did here. If I do this dot next dot height and I pass in bottom height, then whatever this calculation is being passed as the height for the next div, this one right here. And again, the containment is not the actual parent div, but the child div within it. So when we're scrolling, it's more fluid. I'm going to wrap up this video with a brief examination of the images we used to draw the scroll bar. These are to the corner, the inactive corner, the horizontal track, the disabled track, the hover track, and then the vertical ones. For the horizontal, basically create the same thing and then rotate it 90 degrees. Let's open one of them. Let's open the horizontal thumb. Right click, open with, photo viewer. Let me zoom in. We can see we're creating a nice shine effect here by adding light red or white pixels around the top and the sides. So when we zoom out, the more we zoom out, we see a little bit of, it's not just a solid color. It pops out, it's more 3D, and we see the light is hitting it from the sides and a little bit from the top, right? So it doesn't look just a flat red. We're making it pop out of the screen a little bit, giving it a nice layered, textured 3D effect. And we wanted to do that with the rest of our images, right? Create something interesting, something usable. And of course, always start with large zoom and small number of pixels, right? We want to zoom in at something like 1,500%, something crazy. And then we work pixel by pixel. You don't want to start with a large 1920 by 1080 canvas, paint something huge, because then when you zoom out, it's gonna get squished, right? You're trying to pack in too many pixels, and we want it to be natural. We also want the image to be small so that we're not taking up a lot of resources, like 4 kilobytes 4 KB is nothing. When we do a huge image and then zoom out, we're packing megabytes of data in that small thing, and it's going to be sluggish and just terrible. So let's not do that. I think that's it, folks. This video is running a little long. If you have any questions or comments on anything I've covered, or if you'd like to see more content regarding any of these components, or just a more general tutorial on jQuery or JavaScript, please let me know down in the comments. I'll be happy to get to it. I have a lot of content planned for you folks. I'm very excited, and it's not just tutorials, right? I mean, we're doing C++, jQuery, CSS, HTML, JSP, Java, different things. There's so much it's coming out, but I'm looking forward to it. In addition to that, we're also doing ambient tracks, regular tracks. I'm going to be trying to do animation, which is really difficult, but I want to learn how to do it. And I think the best way is to just go ahead and knock something out. Then we're doing blogs, game reviews, and much more. So if you can, please support this channel. It'll mean a lot to us. Subscribe, leave a comment, like, favorite if you like this tutorial, and if you want to see more of it. It helps us out. I appreciate it. And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time on an Arcology Designs production.